we're very lucky to have Pippa Bartolotti and Bill Lombardo. Pippa is the former leader of the Green Party in Wales and England, and Bill probably doesn't need any sort of introduction. But anyway, he's a co-coordinator of UNAC and a very active member of Neighbors for Peace, and they're going to talk about their trip to Odessa, Ukraine.
Well, thanks for coming out. It's a really beautiful night. We were talking on the way over here. It would be a nice night for a bike ride. But instead, we're here. So I'm glad you came. Pippa and I were invited to go to Odessa because people may recall, and we'll talk more about what happened, but on May 2nd in 2014, people of Odessa were protesting the coup that had taken place in Kiev, and they had a 24/7 vigil at a kind of park in Odessa, and there had been a football game, soccer game. People came in from various parts of Odessa, but the real right wing mobilized to come for this football game, but they had ulterior motives, and there was a massacre on May 2nd of the people that were protesting the coup. And we'll talk more about that and show you some pictures and so forth, and some videos. Every week at the place where the massacre was, it was a plaza in front of something known as the House of Trade Unions in Odessa. They hold a vigil to remember the people who were massacred. And once a year on May 2nd, they hold a big action and they bring flowers. Thousands of people walk past, and the relatives of those that were massacred show up. And every year, the right-wing forces again show up and threaten them. And this year, they did that again and mobilize people from around the country again to come in. So they want international observers for their own safety and to record if anything happens. So we were there. One of the other people who was there with us was this guy, Moss Robeson, who lives not far from here. He lives down in Newport. He's a young man in his early 20s, but he's done a lot of research into what went on in Ukraine during that period, and really understands it at a level. He also has done some research, which would have been really good for him to be here. The right-wing forces, which really trace their origin back to people that supported the Nazis and helped murder the Jews in Ukraine during World War II. They have an organization among Ukrainians in the United States, and they actually have a camp down by Newports. And there is a statue of the leading fascist leader from Ukraine, who was a person who supported the Nazis during World War II. His name is Bandera, Stephen Bandera. They have a statue of him, and they have a summer camp where they practice and train, and it's very close to where we are. So he had information on that, but we'll find out more information on it and let everybody know. But so Pippa's going to start the talk, and then I'm going to fill it in, and then we'll have questions and answers and discussion about what happened and so forth.
Person you put me in a box and I'll just jump straight back out again. And as you have a couple of extra minutes, can I just tell you a little story? Just because today is June the 6th, and at around this time, when I was in my 20s, I happened to be on Omaha Beach in Normandy. And I was standing on a tall sand dune looking out to sea, imagining what that scene must have looked like back in 1944, and a gentleman came up and stood right next to me, and he sort of stood really quietly, and I wasn't saying anything either. There were just the two of us there. And then he said, he looked at me, he said, see that? He said, see that arrowhead on his epaulette? He said, I was the first on the beach. And I had no words to talk to him about that. And I don't think words were necessary. And we stood there for quite a long time, just looking at the beach and looking out to sea. And it was one of my first introductions to an American person as well, oddly enough. Anyway, let's crack on. Thank you, Joe, for introducing me. So, the story starts really where we were invited to be international observers on this commemoration day. There is a great worry amongst certain quarters that the right is now rising to a point where it's going to be very difficult to control, certainly in Odessa. But it was decided that we wouldn't go straight to Odessa because it might draw undue attention, that we should go into Kiev. And so we flew from Wales, as it happens, into Kiev, or Kiev, as it's called locally. And this is the view from our hotel balcony window, which was really very nice, as you can see. And this is our hotel. One of the sad things about our hotel is that snipers were posted there. And at the time of Maidan, when 100 people were killed, unarmed people, in the streets underneath, this and the surrounding buildings were areas where the, to date, unidentified snipers caused a great many deaths. And these are our guides, Anna and Sergei. Sergei had lost a friend on that day in 2014 in Maidan, and Anna was a very good English speaker, and so they were our guides. Now here's another of the buildings restored. They've all been restored, where snipers were placed to shoot down on the, up until then, peaceful protesters underneath. And around this square, which is the main square, Maidan Square in Kiev, many of these buildings also had snipers in them. Now, Joe can go into a little bit more detail as to who put those snipers there. These mercenaries who had been trained for a long time for this sort of thing by powerful political forces trying to change the regime. And he will fill you in on the absolute detail. My job here is really to set the scene for you. And again, the another place where snipers were stationed. 100 people died. Oh, Joe, you're enjoying this so much, you're walking out.
I already heard it.
I was going to say.
Oh, you were there. So 100 people died, and around the streets they have their pictures and their flowers for them laid quite freshly most days. It was an absolutely disastrous thing to happen. A lot of the evidence was removed. This isn't a picture of me standing next to a tree. This is a tree that has replaced the tree that was there before. Because many of the trees had bullet holes in them. And if you could find the bullet holes, you'd be able to see the trajectory. You'd be able to find out roughly where the bullet was fired from. So they took all the trees down and they replaced them. And you can see the little ribbons around these trees in commemoration. This was, the state was involved in this all the way along the line. And the trees, if you like, tell their own story. And Kiev, if you've been there, you'll know that there's an enormous forest in the middle of it. Instead of building on every slice of real estate, this was preserved. And there were beaches all around. So it's not a bad place to be, with the rivers and the sea, the forests and the beaches. It was a pretty gloomy day, but imagine, this would look pretty nice on a nice day. And it was an overnight train down to Odessa. So there we are. Sorry, Joe. There we are. We were very well looked after. A cup of tea and coffee was brought to us, and the sheets were all lovely and clean and beautiful. So it was very nice, except it was night. So we missed a huge amount of Ukraine by going through at night time. And then to Odessa. Now I particularly took a lot of pictures of the architecture because it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Many buildings are of such a high standard, a sort of French-Italian look about them. And this is in part, or in the main, due to this bloke, the Duc de Richelieu, who in 1795 decided that the city could be planned, could be thought about. He even collected tree seeds and saplings to come and plant in the city, because there weren't trees there at the time. It was state country, so it was more plains than trees. So if you go into Odessa, you'll find many varieties of trees, and I mean, I'd never seen some of them before. And he had gathered these particularly, and apparently there's only one street in Odessa which does not have trees in it. It's really a beautiful place. So all thanks to the Duc de Richelieu for planning that. And here are our guides in Odessa, Nana and Sergei. Nana, who is an amazing artist and photographer. We have one of those in the room as well. Now, part of our job there was to understand the story of what happened 5 years ago in Kulikovo Square in Odessa. And to that end, we interviewed a few people, sometimes for many hours. We collected a lot of testimony. We had a very good translator, a very reliable translator, who was with us on the journey. The gentleman on your right has written a book with a lot of the details and a lot of the work he did to discover what actually happened. The gentleman in the middle, who's on the phone at the time, he also was happy to talk to us, but we were really quite unsure where he came from. He's wearing fatigues of no particular army. Okay, you tell us later then. And this other gentleman who's a solicitor, he's a lawyer, trying to bring justice for some of the people involved.
Did I just say? This guy in the uniform, behind there is a rally. It's a street rally that's going on. It's a fascist street rally. There was a fascist group that was holding a rally there because the stuff that happened on May 2nd in 2014 started right there, which was really right across from where the apartment we were staying in. And some of their people were actually killed during that period. And that was a memorial to them. And this guy was asked by one of our hosts to speak to us, but he is the head of a right-wing militia, an armed group of right-wingers. There's many of them throughout Ukraine. He's one of the leaders of it. And he was willing to speak to us because we were Americans. And he said, "Oh, you're Americans. I must tell you I have an American flag in my house. And I must tell you that I'm a Protestant rather than a Orthodox Catholic, which the different Ukrainian and Russian Orthodox religions were there, because he was very much pro-US. But while he was talking to us, I think they noticed that he was talking to us, and they called him on the phone, and he said, "I'm wanted back there." So after only a few seconds of talking to him, he was called back.
Thank you, Joe. And actually, incidentally, this gentleman here is not who would have been in this presentation with us today. So there are a lot of factions. There are also a lot of religions. Some some are recognised and some are not. And out in the background there, as Joe pointed out, there was a memorial service for 3 people who had been killed in that vicinity. There are a lot of flags involved, the fascist flags as well as the Ukrainian flags. It was quite difficult to unpick exactly what was going on there, but it was clearly a prelude to something else, which you will see. Just going to whiz through some bits of architecture because I think it's worth knowing that this is a very pleasant place. It's quite uplifting in its way. It's many buildings of great architectural merit and churches. The golden onions, as you would expect from an Orthodox church. This was the opera. Oh, we went to the opera whilst we were there, by the way. The tickets were $3 each. And it's beautiful. The opera house is absolutely gorgeous. And that's proof that Joe was awake during some of it. But then I'll just whiz through these because as soon as you look up, you just see all this beautiful architecture, all this handwork. And there is a school of thought that your surroundings are very much part of your attitude. And and if you're surrounded by beauty and by nature, you will be less stressed and your attitude will be more ambivalent, which in some ways is a bit of a worry in a place like Odessa. So I'll stop in a minute. Some of it was just too amazing. And of course the port, which is a huge part of the economic viability of the area and also a huge part of the trade with Russia and other areas in the vicinity, is that apparently the RAF pretty much demolished it in 1944, but it's been rebuilt and it's very vibrant, very busy. Station, and we even found a vegan restaurant. Vegano Huligano, which I thought was pretty good. Now, here's the reason we were there. This is the House of Trade Unions, and behind Joe and Moss and Anna and Felix is Kulikovo Square, where there had been peaceful protesters for many days, camping out. The House of Trade Unions has been restored. It was burnt. And this is the beginning of the day when people are starting to come to lay flowers for those who perished on the 2nd of May 2014. And you've got to remember, and Joe will go into this in much more detail, that it seems the state allowed this to happen. It seems the state allowed armed right-wing gangs into this area and the police held back. When the building caught fire, the fire brigade held back. It was a 5-minute walk from the fire station to this place. We walked it. The fire brigade took more than an hour and a half to get there. When the building was burning, the people either shot as they came out or beaten as they came out and driven back in again. An absolute disaster. Later on in the day, rows and rows of flowers start appearing. Very much the mothers who came, but these people also came, wearing swastikas openly, symbols of the far right, of the fascists and the Nazis, in the same square. People who are part of the gangs who killed those 48 people are allowed to mingle in with them. More than that, the mothers who wanted the right to speak weren't allowed amplification. Yet later on, the fascists were allowed amplification. It's it's very chilling when you see people wearing this kind of thing openly. Joe did tackle them on the subject, and we nearly we nearly caused an international incident, and we had to be taken away because, you know, the old ladies particularly are pretty feisty, and they were letting rip. We started it off, but it was all just below the surface, you know, waiting to tell these guys to just get out. This again says the right, oh gosh, what is it, Joe? The right.
That was that rally we saw down.
Yeah.
It's where some of their people fighting after Maidan, since Odessa basically was against what happened at Maidan. There was fighting that went on between the pro-Maidan and anti-Maidan forces. Some of the right-wing people were killed in some of that fighting, and they're doing a ceremony for
So we saw many of this type of labelling around town on that day, very openly. But, you know, that beautiful city, and those lovely people we met and we talked to, also have to put up with this. This is the end of the fascist rally that we saw that same day. Joe's got some video to show you also of the march that was beforehand. But they were chanting, "Hang the communists from the trees." They were vile. They were really, really threatening. And yet the people of Odessa, on the whole, were just shutting themselves behind their doors and letting this group grow and become more and more confident on the streets. We were there to witness this and to spread the word. Because the rise of the right in Odessa and in Ukraine is a threat for all of us, really. We have to be aware that even in a beautiful, beautiful city like Odessa, with people who have suffered from the wars, with people who have suffered from mass forced migrations, from who've been sent away to concentration camps, who died, who starved. These are the people who are allowing the rise of the right by not doing anything. And it's a huge, huge task for all of us to not let this happen under our feet. So I'll leave you there with that thought, and Joe will now fill in the detail of our visit and much more of the politics.
So, thank you, Pippa. So just a couple of things. Pippa said that a lot of the people were sheltered behind the door. People kind of ignored as they saw the fascist march through the city, but everybody we spoke to was against it. And for instance, the next morning when we were having breakfast, and Pippa, it was right near where that rally took place, Pippa mentioned it to the waitress. She said, "Oh, I'm just so ashamed. I didn't even know they were there." And the people that we were with, both in Kiev and in Odessa, were anti-Maidan. They were the people that were against the coup that took place in Maidan. Most of them were Russian speaking. Russian is the major language of Ukraine, not Ukrainian. However, with the government now, even in areas where Russia is the only language, Odessa is one of those areas. I mean, everybody understands some Ukrainian. It's a combination of Polish and Russian and all the different languages of the people that actually settled there. It's not a native language. But the signs and so forth are in Russian. And the last president, this guy Poroshenko, he was for pushing that policy through, ending Russian as a language in Ukraine. He was going to get Crimea back. He wanted to continue waging the war in Donbass, the eastern part of the country, where they basically separated from Odessa and have proclaimed their own republics, the People's Republic of Donetsk and People's Republic of Lugansk. and in places like Odessa and other places also. Pippa mentioned the forests. Like in the middle of Kiev, there's a forest, which is really interesting. Part of the explanation is that Kiev was part of the Soviet Union, and it was not a capitalist economy there. In capitalist economies, the center part of the city is the most high valued real estate. That's where the commerce and the trade goes on, and that's why you get these big buildings, because every square foot costs so much money that it makes sense for the buildings to rise very, very high and to get as much of whatever you can on that property as you can. And that kind of drives these skylines that you see. But in the middle of Kiev, there was a forest, which I thought, so their concept was that it would be a nice place for people to go. So if you have a different kind of economy, that is one possible thing. This is Maidan Square. Those pictures you see around are pictures of what happened in Maidan, which started in 2013, ended in 2014. And what really happened there was the government, which was the leader was the head of what was called the Party of Regions, which was basically a party that recognized the fact that the history of Ukraine was one group taking it over, and then another group taking it over, and this part has Moldavian population, and this part has German population, and this part has Italian population, and this part has Russian population, and that these areas should be kind of in a confederation where they have their own governments, but are part of all of Ukraine. And that was what the Party of Regions stood for, and that was the biggest party in Ukraine. However, it was corrupt, like all the politics that went there, and so people came out to Maidan to protest it. But when the United States saw this, very similar to what happened in Syria, they jumped in right away and started encouraging violent and right-wing groups to get involved and to be violent. You might remember, what's her name? Nuland. Why can't I remember her name? Victoria Nuland, who was the Undersecretary of State. She went to Maidan and she passed out cookies, and the people that we met there and what we had heard at the time was the United States was actually paying people to stay on there, and she was encouraging them to keep it up and overthrow the government. And then she was heard on her phone hacked, and you might remember this because the whole conversation went back and forth. Who the U.S. wanted to replace the present government, and that is the government that did come in after this coup. But as Pippa mentioned, the people that were shooting from the hotel that we were in, and from another building on the other side of the square, that building over there, which is a music conservatory, and from other places, there were snipers. And the feeling of the anti-Maidan people was these snipers were there to kill people, to stir up people, to continue the process of overthrowing the government. And that pretty much has been proven now. In fact, I can show you, and I'll tell you where it is if you don't want to watch now. They've done some real research into this, the anti-Maidan people, and they have actually found most of the snipers. And most of them were from the country of Georgia. And they were simply mercenaries. They were given a task to do, and they fired and they killed people, and this stirred things up. But could you imagine if Russia or Cuba or China or some other country came to occupy Albany or occupy Wall Street and said, "You're doing a great job, here's some money, keep it up," and so forth? You know, this was my second time in Ukraine. I was in Ukraine in 2006 after the Orange Revolution. And we were told then similar things. We were told that by someone that supported the Orange Revolution, well, we really appreciated your country, meaning the United States. And I said, why? And they said, well, they provided the buses for us to get up to Kiev. They paid our employers so they wouldn't lose money if we left to go up to Kiev and you know would do this thing. So the United States has played a big role, and there actually were thousands of U.S. registered NGOs that were in the country at the time and played a role. This is also the playbook they used in Syria, and it's the playbook they're trying to use in Venezuela. But in Venezuela is a difference because the government was not liked in the Ukraine, but the government is liked in Venezuela. And the Venezuelan people will not go along. So this was Maidan, and this is where the coup started. But throughout much of the population, the coup was not supported. There were large demonstrations in other parts of the country against the coup. Odessa was one of those places. And eventually, some of those areas called the Donbass, which includes the Lugansk and Donetsk, kind of have broken away and have formed their own governments. There's still fighting going on there. And Poroshenko, the last president, supported that fighting. Crimea, of course, voted overwhelmingly to leave because they did not want to see this coup. And there were demonstrations in many, many other parts of the country. This is a video. It shows a little bit about what happened on May 2nd. Let me just, I'm not going to go through all of it, but you'll see when the people started marching from the football stadium in the center of the city towards, I wonder how I can turn this up. Anyway, these are the people that this is the people marching, the right-wing folks marching towards the House of Trade Unions where the massacre took place. I'm going to skip a little bit because I don't want to play the whole thing. But I can tell you what all these things are. You can see they were armed and ready to do some trouble. This is Odessa. They got to Kulikovo Square where the 24/7 vigils were there. But they out and they chased into the building, and then they started throwing Molotov cocktails and lit the building on fire. They also shot at some of these people, and they were falling. I have a picture of the police just letting these guys go through. Let me just see if I can find that. Here they are. They knew these people were causing trouble, and the police just let them go through. Some of the fire starting, people out on the ledges. When the fire got very big, people started going to higher floors, and then the fire started going up, and people started jumping off. And many of them were beaten to death on the ground there. They're encouraging people to jump. And they're telling them not to jump. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's see if I can go back. See a little bit more of that. Last viewed, okay.
When was this video made?
This was made on May 2nd in Odessa, 2014. Basically of what happened. I'll just quickly take shots going through it. We were told, one of the people, when you saw him there, he was with, there was two people, an older man and a woman named Nana, who were kind of our hosts in Odessa. He was a captain of the police force when this happened. And he was in charge of the group of the police that were at the stadium. And he saw when they got the text messages to get up and start marching towards the thing, but he said there was no way they could stop them. There was another police captain who he talked about, who basically told the instructions that the police were given. They were told either to leave their phones at the station or to turn them off. So there was almost no way to communicate with people about what was happening if any of the police were inclined to stop. But basically they were, let's see. Sorry, I don't know how this is happening here. Just do want to go on. Restart program. Let's just try that. Sorry. Okay. These are people, we were there at about 2 o'clock and you saw those people with the fascist signs on. I went up to them and started talking to them. I wanted to see who they were and why they were there. And they started kind of shouting that all the people that were killed were not Ukrainians, they were Russians. And all the people that are here, these people, were also Russians. And when that started happening and the people around them started hearing, mainly the old ladies took them on. They were saying, you know, get out of here, you fascists, we're never going to allow fascism in our country again. We are Ukrainians, we're not Russians, and all this kind of stuff. And really through the day of people laying flowers, and then at 4 o'clock we came back when the mothers were there, and that's when there was a big rally. However, the police did not let them use the sound system. So most of these people could not hear what the mothers of those and the families of those that were killed had to say. This man over here is that police captain we talked about, who was our guide and was anti-Maidan. That's Pippa. And this guy over here survived May 2nd. He got higher and higher in the building, and eventually he was rescued and was taken down. And he was then asked to go to Russia to see what happened after this took place. The people that did the shooting, that threw the Molotov cocktails, that did the beating of people on the ground, every one of them is known. There were video tapes of all of this. Some of the videotapes here circle the people. This is so-and-so, this is so-and-so. They're known who they are, but none of them were arrested. The only people that were arrested were the survivors who were in the building who were arrested. And 30 of them were arrested by the police after this. The next day, what happened was 30,000 people from Odessa came to Kulikovo Square, saw what happened, the burned out buildings, some of the dead bodies were still there, they didn't do anything. The police never put tape around it as if it was a crime scene to take evidence. They never took any evidence, they never did an investigation. So 30,000 Odessans marched to the police station and they just took the people out of the jails, and they released those people. This guy here on the left was one of the people that survived, and afterwards he was asked to go to do an interview on a Russian TV station about what happened, and he went up to Moscow and did this. And he was sure at that particular time that those 30,000 people and the others in Odessa were going to come together and do what was done in Lugansk and Donetsk. And he says, and I don't know if this is true, that the Russians came up to him when he was there and said, we don't want you to do that. We need to try to maintain relationships with the West. We need to try to maintain relationships with Ukraine, and that would not be a good thing. And he believed the time went past that they could have done that. At that particular moment when the whole population was mobilized, he thought they could have. This is Pippa putting flowers at the there. That's these guys again. Here's the police standing by. These fascists, about 40 of them, just waded into this crowd and were being provocative, trying to start fights. And the police just stood there again, you know, so I took pictures of that. I mean, why wouldn't they stop them if they thought there was a confrontation? And finally, let me just show you one last thing here, now I can talk about some stuff.
What are they yelling?
We'll ask the Russian speaker what they're saying. There's several different groups, and some of them were these paramilitary groups, like some of these people in the uniforms that marched with them. But they were only able to mobilize about 1,000 people from throughout the country. This is the whole size of all their people. And they mobilized from out, they had buses coming to Odessa.
Communist countries?
Well, anyway, that shows you. This is kind of the way fascism rose in Germany. Kind of let it happen. Pippa said that people kind of close their doors to it. In some ways they do. But there is an opposition. And the people that hosted us were part of that opposition. They said they had to organize underground because the fascists are armed, U.S. arms. They are, I don't know if they're armed, but they're not organized and armed, and they're not looking for an armed confrontation in the same way. So they organize underground. The woman that invited us, who works with the Committee of Mothers, which is the relatives of the people that were killed there, her name was put on a website. There's a right-wing fascist website. When your name's put on that website, you either are assassinated or you get arrested immediately. So she had to leave the country while we were there. It's a pretty serious situation that's going on there. But there's a lot of hope. One thing is the election that took place. This guy named Zelensky was elected. Now the people we were with had no faith in Zelensky at all. They said he's just supported by another oligarch, it doesn't mean anything. But that's true of a lot of our own politicians. But what's important, I believe, is that people voted for him overwhelmingly. He got 75% of the vote to Poroshenko's 25% of the vote. Poroshenko was the hard liner. Poroshenko was one of the people that go annually up to the statue of Bandera and do the fascist salute on his birthday. The Speaker of their House is an open Nazi, an open fascist. He says it openly. A number of their politicians are. But Zelensky won by 75%. Zelensky is Jewish. I'll show you the propaganda, I have it, that these right-wingers are doing. It's anti-Russian and it's anti-Jewish. And they, take Star of David and they write over it swastikas, they attack Jews in the streets. And this guy is Jewish, he got 75% of the vote. He's a Russian speaker, that's his primary language. And he ran on that we should have two languages, Ukrainian and Russian, and both should be national languages, and people in the schools or anywhere they want should be able to speak both. He's against fighting to get Crimea back. He is for ending the war with Donbass, and he's for making better relationships with Russia. The United States is very interested in Ukraine because it has the largest border with Russia. And it's part of the whole policy of getting NATO to surround Russia and to noose and eventually defeat Russia economically, politically, and perhaps militarily, which would be very dangerous because Russia, like the United States, is a major nuclear power. It used to have nuclear weapons on Ukrainian soil, and when Ukraine, after the Soviet Union fell, when Ukraine became independent, they decided they didn't want those anymore and got rid of the nuclear weapons that they had. However, the United States wants them to put its nuclear weapons on their territory now. So rather than Russian, it will have US nuclear weapons. So this is the battle that's going on. And it's a battle which a lot of people, especially in the anti-war movement in the United States, don't know about. Odessa is considered a hero city because when the Nazis came, it was thought that the Nazis would overrun them in days. But for months and months, they fought off the Nazis. And, every year there was Victory Day that's celebrated in many of the Eastern European countries. It was the defeat of the Nazis. They don't celebrate that anymore in Ukraine because they don't like the idea that the Nazis were defeated. And I don't know who that is, but that's my Facebook, so I better close it. I can't see without my glasses. Okay, there we go. So anyway, so these are some of the other videos. I can show you some of those, and I have others, including the confessions of the people that actually did the shooting. So this is the story that's going on in Ukraine, and there's a right-wing movement that's developing throughout all of Europe, but in Ukraine it's the most advanced. It's where it's openly see swastikas around on the streets, written. We saw it written in chalk on the streets and on the side of buildings and places like that. So it's another area where the American anti-war movement has to be conscious of, and we have to stop the rise of the right and the move towards war, which is seen in Ukraine. So let's do some discussion. Pippa, do you want to come up here and help? Yeah, Terry.
Does Ukraine have much oil?
No, but right after the Maidan, the head of the finance, an American, became head of their finance department, but Biden's son became the head of their main gas company. So it has some gas. They were hoping to do fracking there, but the fracking doesn't seem to have worked out well.
Many oil processing plants, right?
Do you want to? Can you tell people what was being said on those marches?
Well, the main slogan is the one that was used by Bandera and Shukevich during the war when they were collaborating with Nazis. And it sounds like glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes, meaning fascists with collaborating with Hitler. So, and everybody knows where the slogan is from. So whenever people say that, it's for this nonsense.
They also were playing this militaristic music. Please let them have their sound system in the middle of Ukraine. They wouldn't let the mothers have their sound system. It's amazing.
Joe, could you repeat what she said?
Oh, she said it's a kind of a patriotic glory to Ukraine and glory to the heroes, and the heroes were the right-wing leaders that supported the Nazis.
It's the phrase, the exact phrase that was used in the army of Bandera and Shukevich.
It was the phrase that was used by the Bandera people. 1, 2, 3. That's,
Okay. I have a question too about the very beginning of your talk. You said that originally they were going to have different regions, you know, a coalition of those. Why specifically would that have been a threat to the U.S.? Or did the U.S. think it was a threat?
well, the guy from the Party of Regions and the Party of Regions was sympathetic to, they were trying to decide whether they should go with Europe and the European Union or as a major trade partner or Russia. Russia was offering them a better deal. The Party of Regions was interested and was not anti-Russian like some of the other parties were. And so he was interested in doing that. The Party of Regions is banned now. It was banned. It was not allowed to run anymore. And also the Communist Party was not allowed to run anymore.
Thanks.
Yes.
The parade was about 1,000 young people from around the country. And do any of them come from a place where the political ideas were actually more fascist than others? Or?
Yeah, the right wing is strongest in the West. And the main city in the West is a city called Lvov, which is considered like the Switzerland of Ukraine, very European city. I've actually been to Lvov, and a lot of the right wing was there, and in the western part of the country. And in Odessa, in the eastern part and the southern part, and parts of the West. I mean, you know, they talk about, there was also a lot of anti-Maidan sentiment, especially in the ethnic communities, because they understood this was against all ethnic communities, and there are many ethnic communities in Ukraine. But one of the things that's said about Venezuela is that people are leaving Venezuela. Well, let me give you the facts. Since the U.S. And its allies took over in Ukraine and started instituting some real neoliberal policies, it's a disastrous economic situation. And just about everybody we talk to, even the people that are our hosts, were all talking about how can they get to other European countries or get to the United States where there's some possibility of making a living and doing things. But Ukraine at the time of the revolution had 55 million people. Now it's 35 million people. 20 million have left to go to other countries just because there's nothing for them in Ukraine anymore, even though it's a beautiful country in many, many ways.
You mentioned some of the fascists organizing underground. Are there,
Anti-fascists.
yeah, the anti-fascists who are hosts?
Yeah, they told us they were organizing underground. I kept on pushing on that point, and the guy that was in the police was a police captain. He said, yes, we do organize, and yes, we don't do it openly, we have to do it underground. They finally told me that. But they were very reluctant to talk to us about their organization.
Were there other places in the country where actually anti-fascist groups confronting the fascists?
Not in an open way. They do it in ways like this flower thing. And in Kiev, the same thing happened. On May 8th or May 9th, when it's Victory Day, even though it's not celebrated in Ukraine anymore by the officially, people come out and celebrate it, and that's an act of defiance. And there was actually violence in Kiev. The people showed us where everybody would come the next couple of days after we left to leave flowers, and basically it's an act of defiance against the present government. And he said, you will see flowers, piled 6 feet high, everybody comes. And apparently, when we got back, I heard on the news that there had been giant number of people that came in Kiev and laid flowers, and there had been confrontations with the right wing over that, who tried to stop people coming into the park where there was a monument where everybody was going to leave the flowers. So there's that kind of thing. But there's more. There was one picture, I don't know if we showed it here. We kind of walked up to the front of the area right there, and there were some very, very big guys that were there. And they were clearly part of the defense committee if the fascists started something. So there's that kind of thing that's going on. Unfortunately, the fascists have captured the imagination of some of the youth, and that's a real problem.
You've got to understand that there's a real fear. The lady who had invited us out there, whom we were expecting to meet, sent us a message shortly before we got there saying her name had appeared on this particular website. Now, when names appear on this right-wing website, people are killed. Those names are killed, and she had to go underground. So, these people are armed and they mean business. They are trying to frighten everybody. They are trying to frighten people so that they do not oppose what the fascists are doing. And this is a really tricky area, and this is where it reminds us again of 1930s Germany, where there was a certain amount of feelings of being unsafe if you spoke out. And this is the kind of thing that's happening now. So it's tacit, it's not absolutely obvious. But when people have to go underground, to organize underground, when they're actually in fear of their lives, then other people who might join them are going to stand back, because I think it is very real. These fascist gangs, they are armed, they're allowed to be armed by the state. They are doing a job. The police stand back, chatting, relaxed. They are not going to stop any trouble. They're not going to stop people getting killed, that's for sure. And it's a real worry if you're an Odessan or a Kievan on the other side, trying to keep, a sort of an equilibrium, if you like, in the cities. So, yeah, I think the fear is very great, and I was quite shocked at how great that was. And though people are ashamed, they don't come out, they don't organise against them. They are actually frightened.
Yes?
If I remember correctly, Zelensky was a comedian.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
And so, can you catch us up to the present day and tell us whether we should be a little hopeful for his presidency or not?
One of the things he's called for was the dissolution of their parliament and re-elections for everybody, because he feels the wind is against the right wing right now. And if they get elected,
Microphone
not only will he
in
win,
here, Joe.
not, the feeling is he's called for the dissolution of their parliament and new elections. And he feels that the right wing will lose in new elections because his candidacy was an indication of that. He thinks the people are tired of this. Now what will happen, I don't know, because the U.S. was a supporter of Poroshenko, the person he defeated. So, I don't know.
I think something else I have to stress is the amount of corruption running through every strata of government and organisation in Ukraine. We were told by people who knew, for example, that back in 2014, the chief of police was taking backhanders from everybody. He was, taking backhanders from one group. He was taking backhanders from the right. He was taking backhanders from anyone, which is why, on the day, the police were told to switch off their phones, so they could not know what was going on. And this was how so many people died and were allowed to die. So the corruption in society is great, and the current elected premier is trying to get rid of this corruption by calling. Well, first thing he did was dissolve Parliament, calling for new elections so that people can start electing people who are not corrupt. And it's more or less said to their equivalent of congressmen, he said, you have to go and prove yourself to the people if you want to be re-elected. So that's pretty much where we are now. And the fact that he got 75% of the vote is pretty good as well. So I think there is some hope, although the people we spoke to weren't particularly hopeful because they know the level of corruption that is endemic in society. Any other questions?
Yes, true.
I'm just wondering if anybody was ever held responsible for the 250
No,
people who were injured in the 50.
Well, here's what happened. They say 48 were killed and 100 were wounded. The people we spoke with said a lot more than 48 were killed. However, the reason they say 48 was given as a number is because there are UN and international bodies that when there's something like that happens, if the number is greater than 50, it automatically cuts in international bodies doing an investigation. So they said only 48 were killed. And they have refused to do an investigation. And of course, they never took evidence. They never did anything. However, you could see the people that did it on videos. And people now have identified them. This is so-and-so, he comes from such and such a place. This is so-and-so, he comes from such and such a place. But they never investigated. However, the UN this year, 5 years later, has now called for an investigation into the killings in Odessa. This video here, if anybody wants to watch, is a short video. Actually, it's 10 minutes, but we don't have to watch it all. But it's some of those people that were the snipers explaining what they did and why they did it and who they are. And it's interesting. And then there's followed by another video which actually shows what happened in Maidan. And it was a war zone. People were being shot all over, and the talk about the trees, they gave a narrative of what happened, and they tried to say it was the police that did the shooting. But the police were all in a specific area around Maidan, and the shooting did not come from that area. It came from the buildings surrounding Maidan. And the bullets would have shown where the snipers came from, and the bullets that could be dug out of the trees would have shown what kind of weapons they had, which were not the weapons that the police had. They were these specialized sniper guns. And so what they did was, rather than allowing that investigation to take place, people woke up one day and all the trees were gone, and they planted those new trees that are skinny now with little ribbons around it to stop an investigation. So none of the stuff that happened back then has been investigated. Anything else, Pat?
This isn't a question. Could I just say something about Odessa in 1980 when I was there?
Yes, of course.
We were in Odessa the last summer weekend of the year, like Labor Day weekend. And we were walking around town on a Sunday morning and came to the railroad station. And there were these clumps of people, all families, they're waiting for their train to take them home to wherever. But they had these steam engines and the smoke was just coming out. It looked like a 19th century scene.
Yeah.
Believe it, but it is something
Well, I think, the architecture and stuff of the Soviet Union was that kind of thing. Anything else? Yes.
What would you say about Canadian attitude to all these issues? Because there's a huge population of Ukrainians who are against Russia in the
Yeah, the Ukrainians that are in the United States, and I assume Canada, are basically right-wing, and that's one of the reasons that they have these Bandera camps, and one of them is right here. And our friend Moss, who lives down in New Paltz, not far from here, and that's where the camp is. It's right outside. I was unable to make it. He's going to talk about some of that. But several places, my organization, UNEC, Chicago was one of them, which has a big Ukrainian population. New York was another place. We held meetings to talk about what was going on. And the meetings were physically attacked by these right-wingers. And some of them carried fascist flags, with the fascist symbol that goes like this, and the flags of the other organizations that actually trace their origin back to the Nazi days and so forth. And they were very violent, and they tried to break up the meetings. There's a lot of expatriate communities in the United States, in my opinion, that come here because they don't believe the country they're from and think this is the land of opportunity, and they tend to be right-wing. So it's not true of all of them, but if you look at the Cuban community or the Venezuelan community or the Ukrainian community in the United States, you'll see some of that. Some are different. Latinos are usually progressive, except for the Cubans and Venezuelans now. The Syrians that I met were very progressive. Syrian community, I don't know why that took place, but that also took place. So you find that, and I don't know what it's like in Canada. I assume it's similar. I assume now the other place where we did find a lot of support for what we were doing was the Russian Orthodox churches in the United States. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church is from the Russian Orthodox Church in Ukraine. And the Russian Orthodox Church tends to support the people in Donbass, and the Ukrainian tends to support the right-wingers. And so that's taking place there. So, I don't know. I don't have a real answer.
Well, I asked about Canada because there is such a huge population of Ukrainians there that they really influence politics. Whenever there is a decision about supplying aid from governments to Ukraine or something like that, Canada is always before.
Well, those are the kinds of things that the anti-war movement in Canada and the United States, and I know the head of the Canadian Peace Alliance, a major coalition there, have to fight. And there's not a real consciousness in the American anti-war movement that what's going on in Ukraine. That's why we wanted to go and want to talk about it. Now, we also hope to have a panel at the Left Forum, which is a thing that takes place in New York at the end of this month, and Pippa and I would speak on it. Moss is supposed to speak on it. and the woman who had to go underground was supposed to speak on it. However, for whatever reason, and this is a left group, they haven't approved the panel on Ukraine, and they did not approve it, but they're waiting. They said it's still being vetted, and all the other panels have been approved. So I don't know if there's controversy, and the controversy in this country a little bit comes around progressive people follow this narrative that Russia interfered into our elections. You look at what the United States did in Ukraine, you look at what the United States does in Russia, it interferes in elections. You look at what the United States does in Venezuela. Every country, we interfere in their elections in a great way, much more than Facebook posts or hacking someone's email. I mean, in serious ways. We do regime change all over the world. So a lot of progressive people, when they see what's going on in Ukraine, say, well, you know, those people in the East are Russian, and Odessans are Russian, and Russia interfered into our elections. And so progressive people have allowed themselves on many issues to move to the right, and one of them is war. You know, you see progressive people saying, yes, NATO should surround Russia. Yes, we should not have negotiations with North Korea. Yes, we should stay in Syria. These are progressive voices that are saying that, and that's something that our movement has to fight against. Anything else? Okay, well, we're here. If people would like to see some more videos, I can show you where you can find them. I have a lot of documentation on the right wing, and I can show you where you can find that in Ukraine, and especially what they've been doing towards Jewish voices and other voices in Ukraine. And I'd be happy to show you that, show you where you can find it, and talk to you some more. Thank you. Yeah.
That narrative about Russia is just repeated over and over again.
Yes.
It's a big lie. Noam Chomsky has if you look him up, he's got a YouTube. He says that's nonsense. The amount of manipulation of the government, the U.S. elections by other governments. Nobody looks at that in terms of, well, who else tries to do this? Nobody. That's the target. So really, the whole thing revolves around our media. NBC, ABC, PBS. None of these things are really giving you a fleshed out story that gives the whole thing. They're all supporting a narrative. And when the Russians had Pravda, and it was the Soviet Union, they would circulate videotapes underground because they knew Pravda was lies and propaganda. Americans don't realize that our media are serving the fascist group. We had lots of fascists back in '33. They would march in New York City. Well, they didn't all die.
In Charlottesville, they had torchlight
yes,
marches.
and they're still with us.
But there's good people on both sides, you forget.
Yeah, absolutely, there are. I'll bet you one or two.
I'm sorry, yes.
It's true, they're shutting down the channels which
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Al Jazeera.
There's no progressive stations anymore in the United States.
You mentioned Zelensky.
Oh, yeah?
Would you like to say what role he played in this TV show?
He was a comedian, and his role was that he played the role of someone who, by mistake, got elected to be the president.
Was that Peter Sellers?
No, Zelensky.
Oh, Zelensky. I was thinking.
Actually got elected. So, you know, I mean, we can elect all these actors and so forth, so maybe other people. All right. Thank you.
You're so freezing. I know. Lately it's always cold. It's sweater, gray jacket. Yeah, I guess.
The AC cranked up, I guess.
See you, Terry.